Well, greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Stand for Ag with Missouri Farmers Care, where we discuss the intersection of agriculture, consumer issues, farm legacies and conversations, and just came through a set of episodes where we delved into the fun of holiday feasts and the bounty that comes from our Missouri farms. Diving in here to the new year, we continue our conversation about legacies. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by the 2020 Leopold Conservation Award recipients, Jocelyn and Addie Yoder, and we'll be talking about the legacy of conservation. This is an issue that's top of mind to many of us. Aldo Leopold, who this award is named for, talked about a land ethic and how landowners must have a land ethic. And I think that ethic is alive and well with Missouri producers. We have truly a relationship with the lands over which we steward and have that top of mind many cases when we are making decisions about farm production, profitability, and our livelihoods, that we are very closely related and have strong feelings for the land upon which we are rooted and which our families have been rooted. And so we're thrilled to dive into that conversation today. So welcome, Addie and Jocelyn. First, we'll talk a little bit about the Leopold Conservation Award. So Addie and Jocelyn are our fourth recipients in the state of Missouri. We are building a body of stewards of the land that are really recognized for going above and beyond. As highlighted by our first recipients, Kate and Matt Lambert from Lynn County, Missouri, she said the exception, upon receiving the award, she said the exceptional thing was that really their work wasn't exceptional, but replicated across the state many times over, that there are land stewards throughout the state. And each year that we build the body of this award, we're proving that there are producers that really do go out on a limb and try some innovative practices and really work to bring in new technologies and new ideas and push the envelope all the time, each and every year, but that this is an ethic that pervades Missouri agriculture. So really, this award highlights, and we are so proud of Jocelyn and Addie, because this award highlights that their farm and thousands of others across the state is where clean air, clean water, and abundant wildlife originate. And with 90% of land in Missouri in private landowners' hands, we have that stewardship responsibility and take that very seriously. So diving into your story, by the way, the Yoders were just recognized at the Missouri Cattlemen's Convention this last weekend, officially presented with this prestigious award and recognized in front of that group of producers. So diving in, Jocelyn and Addie, we welcome you. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves and your farm.
Yeah, so we farm here in Northeast Missouri in Shelby and Knox counties. I farm with my dad and my brother. I moved back to the farm in 2008 and got incorporated into the farming aspect, continued to try to grow. But like I said, we have our own enterprise, but we collaborate with my dad and my brother. We kind of pool resources, equipment, and labor while managing all of our own farms. We work together to accomplish the work of the farming operation.
That stewardship is pretty important, not only on the farm, but in a family business scenario as well, right? So Addie, what's your role look like in the operation?
So my role is a little bit unique when you think of a farmer's wife. When we moved back to the farm, my role in my mind's eye and what I saw happening was to support the farmer, right? It was to fix lunch and get parts and to do all of the other stuff. But as I learned more about the farm and as my own experiences grew, I realized that there's a really great disconnect almost between what's happening on the farm and what's happening at the grocery store and what people are doing when they make those food choices. And I knew that I had a little bit of a platform on social media at the time and started sharing just in kind of a soft way about what we do every day on the farm. So I laugh and I say that he is in production and I am in public relations, because he goes out in the cold and feeds the cattle and grows the corn and does all of the actual physical things. And I am on the back end, and I'm the public face of the farm. I talk to people every day about how things work and corn and the soil and what the kids are doing and how life actually is on a day-to-day basis on a real life farm, and how it may not be what your mind's eye thinks, but it's actual real humans out here doing this job every single day. And as the kids have gotten older, I've taken a little bit more hands-on approach. I get to help with harvest some, and I do still fix some lunch, but most of what I do is the outward facing role.
So that's important, particularly in a social media or online format, right? Because tell us about the booming metropolis where you live.
Well, Cherry Box, what might be our hometown, has a grand total of 3 houses in it now at this point. So we are a distance from any kind of city, town. Maybe the best example is we tell everybody, we're 25 to 30 minutes from a grocery store or a Walmart. So we're very rural. And the advent of social media and just the increased ability to communicate with people outside of our small little community has made it really important and also really valuable for us in agriculture to be able to help tell our story. And that's why Addie's role, a lot of people might think that, boy, that's not a big role on today's farm, but it really is, because the connection between what happens on the farm and the consumers, or the people who are just concerned about the environment, being able to establish those connections to people outside of our own community is huge.
Well, and I used to joke on it a lot and say, if I can have a conversation with one person about books or about workouts or about kids or about puppies, then they're going to remember that one conversation. Oh, she told me to read this book. She also knows about corn and combines and all of those things. So maybe when I have questions about whatever is happening in the news, I can ask her and she can say, oh, but this is what's actually happening here on the ground. This is what we do with pesticides and why we use GMOs. And this is what our decision was. And they can put a face to that term or that phrase or that situation, and they have a voice of trust.
On behalf of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of farm families across the state, I just want to take a second and say thank you, because we are really good at doing what we do, right? We are world class at production. We do a great job filling grocery store shelves and barns and grain bins, and ensuring that we have a secure, safe, really affordable supply of food. We are so busy doing what we excel at that we often forget that link. And that's part of why Missouri Farmers Care exists, but it's also built in relationships like those that you have from people across the country. And so that is so needed. And thanks for opening the barn doors, essentially, and letting people see what you guys are doing in your fields and on your farm regularly, and leveraging those relationships, because I know people are hungry for what we do. They just often, the vast disconnect between where they are and where we are separates that knowledge flow. So thank you. So you guys have been recognized for your production practices and your innovation, Jocelyn. So can you walk us through what production looks like on your farm? And then we can get into talking about some of those innovations that you've adapted as you've done, as your farm continues to evolve.
Yeah, so maybe just a quick background. My grandpa moved to Missouri in the early 1950s and started the family operation. So I like to think in terms of the change that has happened from when he first moved here till now. When my grandpa moved, we tilled everything and plowed it deep. He raised a lot of cattle and ran those across pasture. But as my dad came into the operation, and then as my brother and I have come into the operation, we've realized the importance of incorporating new practices in to try to be better stewards of the land. We know that if we go back to those 1950s methods that my grandpa used starting here, that they're not the best suited for maintaining things like soil health and organic matter and productivity of the land for the long haul. So we've taken that approach as I moved back to the farm in 2008, the idea that what do we need to do to be successful in the long term on the soils here in Northeast Missouri? So we've really tried to incorporate less tillage into our farming practices. We've started to incorporate cover crops. We incorporated precision technology to try to use our resources better within the acres that we actually farm, with the whole idea being, how can we make sure we continue to improve on what we're doing on the acres that we farm, not just for this coming year, but for the years into the future as well?
I think that that's an important point. As you talk about innovation and technology, we use a lot of technology on the farm. There are some that remember days on grandparents' farms, right? And wax nostalgic about the good old days. And those were indeed good days. But the technology that we utilize, everything from the technology that we carry around in our cell phones, right, to the technology that's in your tractor, allows innovations that simply wouldn't have been possible for our grandparents back when they were doing the best they could do half a century ago or 70 years ago. Well, so tell us a little bit about some of the practices then. So you have a lot of row crops. Tell us as we dig into that, and soil health is really important on your farm. And so talk to us a little bit about what is soil health, why is it important, and how do you foster that soil health?
Yeah, so to me, soil health comes down to the ability of the soil to continue to produce a crop, again, not just for this particular year, but for the long term. So it's a combination of fertility, organic matter, living organisms within the soil. It's a kind of a holistic approach to that dirt that's out there that we put those seeds in, that ultimately determines how successful we're going to be. So one of the things that we got excited to be involved with is the concept of soil health has been around for a while, but we in agriculture are somewhat stubborn and not always the most progressive as an entire collective group of people. So I got involved with an organization called the Soil Health Partnership that we're using our farm doing strip trials where we compare growing cover crops side by side with ground that we don't raise the cover crops on. Through some pretty intensive soil testing, we're actually trying to measure what happens and what are the changes or what are the differences between these acres where we're putting the cover crop on every single year versus the ones that we don't. I've always been somewhat of a skeptic of some of the things that are espoused out there about all the benefits that can come from those things. I'm kind of I like to see the numbers and I like to see the proof kind of person. So this has been really valuable for me because it's allowed me to get some hands-on experience on a smaller scale of growing some cover crops and doing some different practices in that vein. But it also lets me see the actual impact and the data that not only I can use for making decisions on my farm, but then will hopefully be beneficial for other farmers out there to be able to help incorporate different practices so that they have the proof of, hey, these are the actual benefits. This was the change in this particular metric that we look at in the soil, and this has a long-term benefit. So that's why it's important to try to incorporate these things in your operation.
That data is so important. You know, when we're implementing things on the scale of acres, it's a big risk and a big input, right? And so getting to drive by someone's place or getting to sit down and have coffee and talk about the wins and the losses and the mistakes and what has been learned is so very helpful. And we appreciate everybody who's able to do that, because I know that I learn best from those who have been in the trenches and who'll share, you know, I tried those tillage radishes and let me tell you what worked and what didn't, and you know what the implications were the next season when I went to deal with the next productive crop. So do you feel like that neighbors ever drive by and kind of scratch their heads and wondering what you guys are trying or practicing?
You definitely get questions from people about, well, why you just have a strip of this? We use cereal rye, for example, a lot with what we're doing. So, the first year we did it, several of the neighbors said, well, why did you just put the little strips out there? Which was a great opportunity for me to just explain what we were doing, why we were doing it the way we did. And they were also then very excited to know what the results were going to be from these trials that we had. I think anytime you're going to be innovative or try something different, yes, there are going to be people who are going to look at you skeptically and wonder what the heck's going on. Why would you even think about doing those kinds of things? But ultimately, again, I'm a numbers and a proof guy. Ultimately, when you look at the results and you have some concrete reasons why you're doing those things and why you're incorporating into the farm, the progressive people and the people who want to be successful are going to explore those same things to see, can they incorporate that into their operation. I like to say that some of the first people who started really espousing cover crops and really tried to promote them, they do things completely different than what we do on our operation, because what works in central Illinois or what works in the flat part of Iowa might not be what works on my operation here in Missouri. But the key is trying to figure out how you can incorporate that and make it work within your operation, depending on the size and the scale and the scope of what you're trying to do.
Yes. So what have been some secrets to success? You've tried a lot of different things. You've had a lot of success with different things. You've built a lot of partnerships. What do you find has been secrets to making those adaptations successfully?
Well, I think number one, it's important to find a local partner to work with in some of these things. For instance, on the precision agriculture side of things, we've gone to variable rate technology on a lot of the things we do. We spread our fertilizer at variable rates. We put seed down at variable populations to try to maximize the efficiency we have on those acres. Every community has someone who is got some experience in the different areas that you might be looking to incorporate. So finding that local partner to help you work through those things can be really important, because maybe they've already learned some of the things that really don't work, or some of the things you really have to pay attention to. Maybe you can avoid those pitfalls as well. One disaster, I say disaster somewhat jokingly because it wasn't really, but one year we planted some cereal rye and it got wet, and before we knew it, the cereal rye was as tall as our heads, and we still had to go in and try to plant that soybean crop. And we got it done, but we learned the real hard way that you don't want to terminate that cereal rye when it's that tall if you aren't sure you're going to get it planted right away. We ended up with a little bit of a muddy mess that we had to deal with trying to get that crop in the ground, because the cereal rye was tall, it was dead, and we got a rain, and now that moisture just sat there in the soil. So there's definitely learning experiences. If you can partner with someone to learn from their mistakes to help them avoid them on your own farm, I think that's pretty important.
That is one of my questions, was going to be, what's been the biggest learning experience? It sounds like that was it. What's been a success that surprised you? That a practice that's really turned out with more benefits than you thought it might yield at first?
I think the cover crop part of the things, in conjunction with going to more no-till within our operation, and this is just going to be anecdotal because there's not any hard science, but we've had some fairly large rain events the last 2 to 3 years, and you can visually see the difference after those large rain events on fields where the cover crop has been growing, and maybe there's no till involved with that too, versus maybe a field that the guy had worked it in the fall. Just the amount of soil you can see pushed to the edge of the field, or sometimes even washed out onto the gravel roads around here. There's a pretty stark difference where you had that growing cereal rye crop, or whatever crop a person may have had in those situations, where just across the fence, it was the other thing, and the amount, just a visual difference in the amount of soil that has been moved. in our part of the world, erosion is one of the biggest challenges that we always face. We're a clay pan soil. We don't have tons of topsoil out there on our fields. Very susceptible to erosion. So finding ways to mitigate that using cover crops, to me, has been one of the biggest successes we've had. Just again, from a visual perspective, you can see a difference in the amount of soil erosion that takes place.
Yeah. So as we've turned the page to 2021, are there practices that you are, what's on the horizon for your farm? What are you looking at implementing?
One of the other studies that we are involved with is actually a water quality study through a partnership with some of the commodity organizations here in the state of Missouri. And I'm really interested, as I've reviewed this data, to see what kind of impacts weather events can have on things like fertilizer applications, planting, different things like that. One of the interesting things we learned is that in one particular instance, we'd spread some fertilizer right ahead of a rain. And we knew it was going to rain. It'd been in the forecast, but it was hey, we need to get this done, so let's get it out there. And it was pretty amazing to me how much more of a nutrient loss we had on that fresh fertilizer application because that rain came right on top of it immediately after. So one of the things through this study that I'm really trying to incorporate is trying to be more conscientious about some of the farming activities that we do when we know what the weather's predicting, just like that particular situation. We could go in there with that mindset, well, it's going to rain, we got to get it done. But maybe that's not the most beneficial thing we could do. Maybe it's going to rain, let's wait for a better opportunity where we're not going to have so much of that nutrient end up going off the field and down the stream because we know that rain event's coming right around the corner.
You're exactly right. Having that data behind us to know the cost of that decision-making process, right, really does help in the long term. It's one thing to know that you've gotten it done, right? To check it off, to know that you've covered that field. And another thing to know, yes, but I've sacrificed 30% or whatever it may be that ends up coming off the field. So we look forward to widespread application of and publication of that data so that everybody can utilize those kind of things. I know that keeping nutrients in place on our farm fields is part of, for our practices and part of what all of us work hard on. I think agriculture is very well aware that we have the opportunity to be a solution to a nutrient problem that exists throughout the Mississippi River Basin. And so thanks for your work and the partners' work on that to make sure that we're doing the best that we can do to keep our nutrients in place. So Addie, let's shift just a little bit to you. So you've done Addie is kind of a fitness guru. She is a woman who loves books and is all over the internet about books, right? So she has some very different interests that have brought an audience to her. So you're also involved in Common Ground. So tell us a little bit, for those that are interested in advocating for agriculture or connecting with you, what are some of the ways that have worked best? Because leadership and communications, by the way, is a part of the Leopold Conservation Award. So this is a really holistic picture of leaders in agriculture. And so what Addie does is very relevant to this award, because if we can do the best job we can, right? And if we don't take time and effort to tell people, we're doing a great job, but not maximizing our potential and sharing with others. So tell us a little bit about what's worked well and your work with Common Ground and others, so that we can kind of see how agricultural advocacy can be successful.
So my advocacy journey kind of came, like you said, out of other things. I already had a platform in progress through the things that I did with health and fitness. And that also connected me with women who cared about what they put in their body, and they cared about what they fed their families. And the more I would listen to their conversations, the more I would hear things about organic foods and GMOs and, different ways that we eat that maybe I had questions on myself or knew. Like, I understood what they were saying, but I knew that that's not quite how it worked here at my house. And through the lens of what we did. I knew that there were some discrepancies, but the thing I didn't know was how to have that conversation without saying, hey, that's not right, because no one wants to hear that. So I got involved with Common Ground 4 or 5 years ago because it gave me some training and some knowledge and some opportunities to be in different locations where I could have heartfelt, honest conversations with people who had genuine questions about the foods that they were purchasing for their family. And those interactions led me to what I said earlier, to sharing more about what we do every day on the farm in my own social media platform. And you can find me, if you want to connect with me, at Addie.Yoder on Instagram, and at Grace and Growth with Addie on Facebook. It was just small things here and there. I could talk about the corn that was in my front yard, and to put puppies and kids in front of corn, and the sprayer all right here from my front porch view is just a really great visual to be able to have honest conversations about different things. And now I'm kind of known as the lady who likes corn. And so I get questions on how is my sweet corn growing in my garden, and do you eat a lot of corn? And they, the different things that you don't expect to hear from an agricultural perspective are so eye-opening, but they're so rewarding at the same time, because people don't know what they don't know, and I don't know what they don't know. So the more questions that I can ask and the more conversations that I can have behind the scenes just leads to a greater connection. I had so much fun this past summer because I would get pictures in my Instagram DMs of corn in Germany and corn in the Carolinas and corn all over the place, because they're like, Addie knows about corn and I'm going to show her what I see driving down the road. And it's just created a lot of really good conversations and connections. If I were to give tips on advocacy, I would say don't be one lane. Don't just talk about your farm, because people want to have that me too moment, like, oh yes, just like I'm like you. They want that connection. And so to have other things in your conversations besides the farm is almost more important than actually talking about agriculture.
Yes, I agree. And building that relationship and that rapport helps, because you're exactly right. Those conversations can be very awkward. To call someone out, especially those that are vocal on our social media platforms, are those that are really passionate about the topics, right? And so they feel they've done a good job educating themselves. They feel passionate, and there is so much fear mongering and misinformation out there, often with the bottom line attached to sell a product, right? That it's really hard to have those conversations. So without that relationship, it just becomes more social media noise, right? And so that's really important to address those real fears.
And I think that for me, I'm kind of scared of those like combative conversations. I don't want conflict. So I go into everything usually with a pretty soft touch, or make it a little bit lighthearted and go into it a little bit more positive than maybe, I don't know, other people do, because I don't want anything that I put out there to come off as offensive or negative or argumentative. And I want it to feel like a safe place for people to come with their questions.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that's one of the hardest things in agricultural advocacy, is that I have a deep abiding desire for people to trust their food supply, right? So whether they buy beef off my farm or out of that grocery store case, which could also be cattle originating from your farm or mine, I want them to feel safe in that. And so, that's part of why we exist and why we have these conversations, is so that people can know, like, Christian tells a heartbreaking story of a mom who was essentially skipping meals and going hungry because she needed to buy what she saw as higher value, more nutritious, organically labeled something food. And it's simply, there is no need to be scared of our food. And so thank you for that and for your advocacy. I encourage people to find Addie on her social media channels and follow other efforts like Common Ground and others, to see how we, particularly as farm women for Common Ground, engage in those conversations with other food purchasers, and to see little snippets of the Yoder's farm in action as well, and see them. As part of the Leopold Conservation Award program, we have created a video that highlights the Yoders, their farm, their practices, some of the values that they're living out there in rural Leonard, Missouri, and would encourage everybody to go and see that and check more information out about the Leopold Conservation Award program. That's all available on the Missouri Farmers Care website. We encourage you to look there for stories of stewardship, leadership, and conservation, and tune in to see if this is an application process that you may want to apply for in 2021. By the way, this is not only a prestigious award that's presented in 17 states annually that builds upon that land legacy of Aldo Leopold, who, by the way, had roots in Missouri with a cabin in the Ozarks, and was a leader at the turn of the last century on land ethic and land principles. But this award, along with this prestige, also comes with a $10,000 cash prize that is kind of an amazing facet that you don't find a lot. And so we encourage people to check that out. This is a great way to highlight the hard work that goes in and day out, year round on our farms. So that is this week's edition of the Stand for Ag podcast with Missouri Farmers Care. Thank you for tuning in and for spending your time with us. Thank you to the Yoders, not only for your leadership and your stewardship, but for joining us today and sharing some of that story. We encourage you to tune in next week for episode 23 of the Stand for Ag podcast, where we will be visiting with Jolene Brown, a certified professional speaker, an award winner, an author, who's going to be talking about family business transitions and family business planning and how to have a business first family on our farms. So we'll be navigating those tricky waters in our conversation next week. And until then, our best to you.